Welcome back. This is the second episode of the AI4U podcast. In today's episode with Dr. Jay Tao, I'm Philip Myman. We both work together at Fairfield University at Dolan School of Business in the Analytics Department. Agents can rearrange the tasks in the order they want to do them. We're going to start thinking about not just prompting, not just answering one question or doing one particular task like you might with an intern, but building entire institutions, building networks, building societies of AIs and agents that interact with each other, and what that can mean for automation. Now, for you, you're probably worried everything is going to get automated away, we're just going to rot away and AI will take over. But when we're thinking about actually automating the pain points in our lives, the things that we're constantly doing, what AI can bring, and as Dr. J will explain throughout this episode, is not just a pipeline for removing something you do repeatedly and making it automated. That will be fine. But it lets us elevate, in his words, the process itself and the goal itself of what we can accomplish. We can do more once we get rid of the constraints that had been binding us thanks to AI. So, Jay, let's take a high-stakes, real-world business problem. Let's take a team. Okay, they spend 10 hours a week on a weekly competitor report. And it's not, they're not asking like a casual question because, like, say this quarter, the report missed a critical move by a competitor and the company got blindsided. And the process for them, it's not just slow, but it's broken. Like, where do you even begin?
So let's put on the consultant's hat and look at the problem. So sometimes before we put anything into action, let alone automation, we'll have to audit how we do certain things a certain way. If you remember from our previous episode, we talk about tasks usually are in steps. Mm-hmm. Now we should look at these steps and do they actually make sense? Will we actually do things that way? So it's never you open ChatGPT and say, do this for me. A lot of times we have to take a look back at the logic, the steps, the transitions. And so we'll have to, look at, things in steps. And a lot of the steps is basically we crawl, then we walk, then we run. Mm-hmm. Right? The automation, the end result is the wrong part. Mm-hmm. But you cannot expect a baby to start running. That would be very scary, right? So there is that. So most of the time, we're not just using automation to do things faster. We're asking it to actually elevate and outcome. For example, the report you just mentioned, we want a better report, mm-hmm. not just generate garbage report faster.
Mm-hmm. I see. So it's not just crawl, walk, run, but also what is the journey? What is the destination, right? Yes. Are we going to the kitchen? Are we going outside to play? Yeah. Are there steps that can be completely deleted?
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about.
Yes.
In other words, I see. So, but that's good advice for any situation, right? Automation or non-automation, just think more broadly mm-hmm. about the broader goal you're trying to accomplish rather than trying to automate the existing process. That's what you're saying.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we think about that? In other words, like this company, this hypothetical, everyone's already thinking about that, right? Everyone's always trying to make the processes better, right? Yeah. Forget AI, forget automation. Yeah. But in the context of trying to automate it, certainly the stakes are higher. It's much more important to streamline.
Yeah.
But does having an AI weapon behind you help you ask questions that could eliminate parts of the process or make it more streamlined or more efficient in a way that you couldn't without AI?
I think, there's a mentality, there's a thought process here, which is what is the proper occasion or scenario or step that you can introduce AI into your current process? It's not just getting rid of something. It's also identify the most rewarding part of your current process. Given you already verify, you already audit the process is correct. Now the next step is to identify what is the step that I should first introduce AI into that's most rewarding. We're always shooting for that quick win.
I see. In other words, we could take this as an opportunity to question the constraints that we thought we had, right? Like, okay, we only have 10 hours to do it. That's not a constraint anymore. What if we had infinite amount of time?
Yeah.
What if we had thousands of people looking at it? What could we do then?
Yeah.
What would be the ideal report or output or whatever we want?
Yes.
And then let's try to get that first, right? Change the path and then figure out how to run there.
Yes. And then, we're looking for signals for automation. For example, current AI is very good at extracting information. For example, you want to analyze this specific competitor. Do you want to extract certain information to include in your report from their website? AI is very good at that, right? Another thing is repetitiveness. If some task is repetitive and simple, why don't you let AI to do something like that? And we should be constantly looking for opportunities to introduce AI, but into your current process. But it's not an easy task. It's not an easy task. A lot of times, I don't know. I think a comic went viral. On the internet, Reddit and X is basically one person yelled to the other people, "Who are we, CEOs? What do we want? AI. What do we want it for? We don't know. When do we want it? Right now." Right? Everybody wants it right now, but what do we want it for? Is the thing we're going to talk a little bit in this episode.
Some of the things I just want to highlight that you mentioned, a few things. One, you're talking about how AI can elevate the entire process, but you also mentioned that, we might think, okay, if I had one brilliant AI, what could it do? But the way you seem to be thinking about it, correct me if I'm wrong, is what are some subtasks, right, that each individual AIs can do that can then be combined together to create a wonderful masterpiece, as opposed to one monolithic, huge 50,000 word prompt like we talked about before. Is that right?
As we're saying in this podcast, we want to make the prompts and the corresponding tasks, of course, very specific. Very specific. And think about this, if you are the managerial consultant, you're not shooting for, I'm going to overthrow whatever you guys do every day. You will never get any adoption because people hate changes. So whenever you want to incur some change and you want people's support, you will shoot for, like we said, the low-hanging fruit, the quick win. So having a specific piece of it, tying that not necessarily to a specific AI, but to a specific prompt to guide the AI, and that's a small link in your verified process. I think that would be a good intro. If you're not, ready to fully adopt the AI, or you're starting to think about, I should adopt AI, how should I get started? Identify one entry point in your daily process is never a bad idea.
That makes sense. So now I think what you're getting at, different from last time we talked about prompt engineering. Now you're talking more about automation and agents, secret agents. What's an agent?
So if you look at the internet, everybody's saying, from Jensen Huang to Elon Musk to Mark Zuckerberg, everybody's saying, this year 2025 is a year of agents. So I find this very interesting, blog from Anthropic that they define agents as the backbone is always the large language model we're familiar with, ChatGPT or Cloud or Gemini. But it added several things to the large language model, a set of things called tools, and that, large language model, they cannot really interact with the external real world. So they do need tools. For example, if they want to actually know what's the weather here in Fairfield, Connecticut, they need a tool to query the weather service. Right? Otherwise, it will just make up. You can make up the weather for you, but it's not real.
So the tool is not part of the large language model.
It's not an internal part of the large language model. It's some add-on. And then the next thing is basically a context. Of course, it has to have access to context. But I think the key difference between, what we call a true agent versus all the other variations we're going to talk later in this episode and other episodes is autonomy. So, think about, this particular task, what we're trying to do here. A lot of times, what we call agents, we are letting AI, large language model, to be part of a process, of a workflow. But you can think of that as dealing with a very smart, intelligent vending machine. Right? You just press certain button, it will actually maybe mix, some drinks and snacks for you. Okay, here is your, between podcast snack that you can have. But an agent should be a very experienced, barista. You just tell him or her, I need a drink between my podcasts that will wake me up, right? And it actually knows you and you're lactose intolerant. You don't really have, dairy products. You should use soy milk, and you actually prefer the black. You don't have to tell it that. So that's what we call autonomy. You don't have to spell out the recipe. Add 2 shots of espresso. That's not an agent.
So last episode, we talked about interns.
Yeah.
An intern would be some combination of interns would be the workflow.
Yeah.
A barista would be like a founder, a CEO, someone you trust to make decisions on their own.
A partner.
A partner.
A partner. A lot of times, that's, we're going to talk about in next episode is, a lot of these agents would be perfect as the tech partner of if you're starting up a business, right? Your de facto CTO of some kind.
The partners and agents, you don't typically iterate with them, right? The only iteration would be to restart the agent and have a new one. Is that fair to say?
But we do either help them actively or passively to evolve.
How?
There are certain ways because, the backbone is still large language model. You can evolve the prompts. The other way is they have to use certain tools. You can give them new tools. And then you can enrich their context. There are several, components make an agent, and you can evolve one of them or all of them to bring the agent to the next version.
Okay, so there are versions of agents,
Yeah.
right? They restart. They don't, like with a human partner, you can refer to, hey, remember when we used to do things this way and it sucked and then we changed? But with an agent, they don't have that memory of evolution. Is that fair?
They should.
They should.
They should have a memory of what they did wrong. So next time when they make a similar decision, they should have access to the memory. Last time they didn't do so good. Maybe that will tip them to make a different decision.
Oh, this is, I didn't know that. So the agent would have its evolution as part of its history.
Yes.
You wouldn't restart the agent with a new prompt.
No. Well, unless it's necessary. Because restarting an agent with a new prompt will cost you, right? But let it learn from its own history will also cost you, but usually much less.
And that the way it learns, obviously it has the context window limitation. So does it have like a log or something of what it should be doing and its feedback?
So people have argued, and I totally agree, observability is a very important thing of any agents. So you should create not only a log, like any system log, this failed, that worked, but also create some kind of logical or reasoning log. Why did certain things certain way? By the way, that's my research interest is to understand, peek into that black box and see what's going on. So I think that's very important for it to look into that. And like you said, it keeps a log, but there is still that constraint, the constraint of the context window. You cannot feed all the logs. For example, you had an agent work on 1 million tasks. You cannot feed logs of 1 million tasks into the context window. It just doesn't fit. So that's why, in this episode, we're going to talk about a certain way to, as we promised, to engineer or to manage the context.
That would be great. Well, okay, so let's start with that. Let's start with, we want to elevate the report, right? The very first problem is just pure style, right? The CEO needs the summary to be perfect. It can't have typos. It can't have words that don't make sense. So how do you teach an AI to do that?
So there are two ways. The first way we already talked about in last episode, which is we can control that through formatting, right? We want a bullet point, no more than 5 bullet points, something like that. But that's very rough. That's very rough control, and a lot of things you cannot even say it explicitly. Make it professional. What do you mean by make it professional, right? We find that the easier way to do that is to show them examples. This is how I would do it. So if you still remember our structure prompt, after ref, maybe you can say, add a section about example output. Your output should look like this, right? So I'm sure, for any business, you'll have some good examples, some win scenarios you had in the past, maybe done by human and things like that. You can provide a few examples in your prompt. So there is a term for that. That's called few shot learning. Each example is a shot. So that's, very good, in two ways. One, you don't have to spell out what makes a win a win. You let AI to figure out what makes a win a win. And the second part is, even if you can spell out all these different conditions to make a win, it will take up a lot of your context. Sometimes just give it examples would be great. But the flip side of that is how to select these examples. There are different, viewpoints from this. One part is, okay, maybe we should, just give good examples. And other people argued maybe we should also give negative examples, bad examples, and say you shouldn't do something like that. And that's I think that's related to psychology, where you have positive enforcement and negative enforcement, and people have argued which one works better with AI, and things like that. But in my actual practice, I find it very tricky when you want to select good examples, because sometimes the examples may be very good or too compelling, and force the AI to just use the examples you provide, and without actually solving the real problem here. And so you want to be enforced, but not too strictly enforced. So you still want to maintain the creativity of AI.
Okay, so when you're giving good and bad examples, would it be helpful, two questions. One, to delete certain words and just put markers. Doesn't matter what these words are. This is just the content, but the structure you should learn from.
Yeah.
And secondly, for each example, give a brief 1 or 2 sentences, what makes it good or what makes it bad.
I think both techniques would work, and I have used both in certain way. For example, and then because there are examples, a lot of times you only care about the formatting, the structure, so the details don't really matter, right? So you can mark these things out. Explain what's make it good. I would say that works, but it's also tricky, because if you can't spell it out, if you can't spell it out, why don't you add it to formatting, right? You can add it to formatting and say, do it that way, right? You don't really need the example. Most of the example I think I use is either it's too complicated to spell what makes it good out, or I don't even know what makes it good. It's just good, right? Like a masterpiece, like a Van Gogh. What makes a Van Gogh good? Right? You cannot spell out what makes a Van Gogh good. Everybody has a different view of what makes a Van Gogh good, right? So why don't you let the AI to look at the Van Gogh, look at the masterpiece, and create its own Van Gogh or some masterpiece?
So last time you mentioned that it's useful to have AI think as little as possible of things it doesn't need to think about, right?
Yeah.
So it can focus on your task in hand. Yeah. Would it make sense to split this up into 2 things and give it the context and the examples and say, now you AI figure out what it is that makes this one good or bad, and take that as the output for the new prompt so you can avoid the examples?
That's a lot of time that works. A lot of time that works, and you can. So that's tied to what we call meta prompting, where you deal with concrete prompt, then you say create a reusable prompt that can use for similar situations in the future. But a lot of times, given the different tasks, a lot of times, given specific example is actually better than dealing with complex prompt. Even this example could be specific outcomes, and sometimes could be specific processes you should follow.
What do you mean by that?
So perform certain tasks in certain steps, in certain sequences. You can even give examples of that.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So tied to what we talk about agents, if they have a successful action log of certain tasks, you can even give that as an example and say, do it this way.
I see. Okay. So there's something more to the examples that can be useful within the context of doing the whole thing than just could be summarized one off.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people think, teaching a baby, right? This is a good practice. And that will reinforce their perception of what's good and what's bad. And next time they'll hopefully behave accordingly with baby. But with AI, most of the time they're trying to abide what you give them. So a lot of times they will follow the good examples.
That makes sense. All right. So the baby, the crawling is the style. That part makes sense. Let's get to the walking. So you mentioned knowledge, and how do you start to incorporate private data and knowledge into the AI, into the agent?
So that's one of the things that everybody trying to adopt the AI or try to research AI is talking about. It's called retrieval augmented generation. So how it does is that we talk about inserting context into your prompt, and sometimes this context are very dynamic, right? Think about you want to create say a contract. But you want to look into, say, the company's financials. So there's financial data. You want to look into legal constraints, compliance. Then there's compliance data. So writing different parts of the contract, you'll have to look into different parts of data sources and retrieve information from that. So how RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, works is it will actually, based on your query, your prompt, your task, it will actually look into whatever data source you hook the AI to, right? Your financial database, your legal documents, and things like that, and try to retrieve the most relevant information to help the AI generate. So retrieval augmented generation is using retrieval to augment, to help with the AI generated content.
So that's one tool, or it's a bucket of different tools?
It's one technique, and then with specific tools, there are many tools that you can deal with. But in general, they're all called, retrieval augmented generation. So it has, it appear in different forms from, all the way from, a vector database to a graph database to, based. There are certain things. So most of that will require you to basically convert whatever data you have into a certain format that an AI can easily access.
All right. So here, I think we've gone past where most people would be comfortable.
Okay.
Right? Because in OpenAI or Gemini, they understand chatting. We understand chatting, right? You can prompt, you can change the prompt. So even the style part, the crawling, we can understand.
Yeah.
But RAG, am I supposed to code this up? How do I use this? What is the framework? Is it part of ChatGPT?
I think, there are specific tools that, you can hook it up with, your model or your agents to, perform RAG. So you don't have to develop RAG per se. There are existing tools for that. What you will need to do is actually two parts. Like I said, first you have to convert whatever data you have into a RAG compatible or a large language model compatible format, and the second part is you have to hook it up with, a large language model. Whenever you set up the RAG, you have to hook it up with the large language model. So the large language model knows a database exists, and it can look at the database when needed. And the second part, both parts actually, there are commercial tools and open source tools that help you with that. So short answer to your question is you don't have to code that, but you will have to use a certain tool for that.
Okay. Okay, so we'll come back to the tools in a sec, but just to make sure, when I upload a bunch of PDFs to Notebook LM or ChatGPT, that's not RAG. That's all part of the context window. Is that correct?
That's all part of the context windows, because with RAG, if you use your PDF example, first the AI should determine which part in which PDF is most relevant to the task. They're not feeding all the contents in the PDF files into the context window. That's how we effectively manage the context window. But with Notebook LM and things like that, you're uploading 5, 10 PDFs. It's reading all 5, 10 out of that. And of course, you can specify, read more into this section in this PDF. But when AI was priming its own context, it will load all 5. But with RAG, it's only loading that specific part.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, great. So for regular stuff like ChatGPT, Notebook LM, Gemini, Claude, I can't use RAG off the shelf, right? Everything we're about to talk about from now on is beyond those simple tools. Is that correct?
It's beyond the chat interface on the web.
Mm-hmm.
We're still using, we're using a lot of tools that's wrapping around these simple tools, right? They will call ChatGPT. You don't have to go to ChatGPT. They will call ChatGPT or Gemini or the Claude for you in the background. You just need to use the tool, which is RAG.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are some agent-based tools that can run on the web that are as simple for users to start playing around with as something like ChatGPT? Are there any, or do we have to start doing something fairly complicated? Do we need experts? Do we need to hire people?
I think, there are certain tools that, if you just want to explore it and without, getting to heavy coding and things like that. I don't know. One of the tools that, I use a lot when I was brainstorming or planning for an agentic framework is called N8N. So it's a drag and draw tool. You don't have to code at all. And, it has different nodes, and you can, have a model node and equip it with certain tools and context and even RAG. It has RAG nodes as well. So you can actually make an effective agent without, too much coding.
Okay.
But in that way, the key difference from, what we're familiar with or we're comfortable with is using ChatGPT and things like that is now you without going to that specific website, you'll have to access the model via something called an API, application programming interface, where you will get a key from, OpenAI or Anthropic, and you'll use that key to, basically access these models.
That makes sense. So it's working on the back end, and it's helping you do drag and drop to build the agent with specific prompts and everything else, and the RAGs and the tools and all the rest of it.
And most of the what we call large language model tools, they're not using anything on the web interface. They are using the API on the back end. Even the tools we build or some consultant, some engineer will build for you. We are using the API on the back end.
Okay. Now, ChatGPT, and I guess others do, they have something called agent mode, which it can essentially start off its own computer, run its own browser, do all sorts of things. Presumably, if your data is available on the internet, you could explain in the prompt, here's how you access it, here's the password, right? And it could do RAG, it could do whatever, same as it could do an internet search. First of all, is it fair to think of RAG as kind of like internet search but on steroids, because it has a little bit more information available and it can find what's appropriate?
I think it not only on steroids, but also it's a directed internet search. You're not, because you don't have to open it to the whole internet.
Right.
Right? That's just a web search.
Yeah.
What you want is these are the potential sources,
right,
candidates they should search on, and only search on that. And a lot of people use RAG for another reason. I think you just touched on is they don't want to put their information on the internet. that these data sources only exist on their local servers, never leave their premises. And they want AI to search these things only.
Okay, and so when that happens, just to talk about that privacy of the locality.
Yeah.
When that'll run on your own internal servers.
Yeah.
It'll directly connect to your data, take what's important, but then feed that full bigger prompt, right? The juicier prompt with the information that it thinks is relevant.
Yeah.
That might, if you're using OpenAI, it'll go out to OpenAI and come back.
Yes.
Or you could use a completely local model, right?
Yeah.
Open source, and nothing ever leaves the
A
premises.
lot of companies actually opt for that because of the privacy concerns. They don't want to share their data with OpenAI or Google or things like that. So they opt for local models. So everything happens in their local environment, never leave their premises. They're not sending any data to OpenAI or Google.
Okay. Agents in general, would you say they're exclusively or nearly exclusively valuable for enterprises and corporations, or are they useful for individuals too? So for individuals, like a personal use, let's say we don't care about privacy so much, right? I have a bunch of data and I just really want to do something cool. In that context, maybe I can use agent mode in ChatGPT or something simple.
I think agent mode itself, I'm not too concerned. Most people, data privacy concern is with RAG, is with where you put the data. But with if you don't really care about privacy, I don't see why not. And me personally, I have a personal agent, personal assistant agent, where every morning it will go through my emails and give me a summary of basically a stand up on what's going on today, what should I do, where should I be today. So it's not just for corporations. We can use it for for anything, I guess.
Okay.
So in a way, I do agree. 2025 is a year of agents, but in a different way, I think we should fix this misconception first, but which we'll talk more about agents in the next episode.
Sorry, the misconception being
people treating workflows and other things as agents.
So suppose someone wanted to build what you did, something that looks through their recent emails, tells them what's on the Outlook, what they should be thinking about. What's the process for them to do that? Because that's not ChatGPT, right? They'd have to go to N8N or something and connect their Outlook.
Yeah. So, basically you have to give it a brain, which is a large language model, whatever you're comfortable with, OpenAI or a local model. In this case, I am using a local model. Then you have to give it tools. Remember, tools give large language model access to external services. In this case, maybe Outlook, maybe Gmail, maybe something else, and then it fetches this email from these external sources, then feed it to brain. The brain will summarize that and create some kind of synthesis for you to read. And I think we dabble enough on the agent stuff, which we'll have more talk on the agent stuff in the next episode. But I do want to say one thing, because RAG is so popular right now. And everybody's talking about you need to build some kind of RAG, and that's the solution. But I just want to remind people, our audience, this is, you need to be careful when you build a RAG. And this is particularly with my own experience is, a RAG, a retrieval augmented generation is, that tool is more like a bloodhound. It will look for specific things. It's very good at that, to be honest. That's very good at that. But a lot of times, so for example, using that, weekly report as an example, if you wanted to find every typos you have, it's very good at that. But because it's very good at specifics, sometimes it misses the big picture. For example, typos, they're good, but a whole missing point, they will never see that. So a lot of times, we do not want a bloodhound. We actually want a detective analyze this report and tell me what's missing. RAG is not particularly good at that, but agents are.
So agents are agents use tools like RAG, then they add reasoning on top of it.
Exactly.
But if you have a single AI, right, with RAG, bloodhounds fail. RAG can fail. Can sometimes fail catastrophically. How can you enhance the trustworthiness of the system that you built?
So I think, where we are basically talking about from one single agent to basically a team of agents. So there are a few things here. Think about your regular production team. You'll have different people performing different roles, right? And why don't we replicate that with agents, with AI, right? You build an AI agent as a coder, you build another agent as an architect and reviewer and tester and things like that. You give it different roles. Because, all we are hoping for artificial general intelligence is we have this kind of one size fits all, AI. But, maybe it will happen tomorrow, but so far it's not there. So we want this, and remember, since the first episode we're talking about, we want things specific. Now why don't you give, these agents specific roles? You just do that, just write code. And just think about, the tech stack, just read this code. Just, write this report, just write this specific section of this report, right? That would have a lot of benefits because simple things, simple, elegant, right? So you want to keep these things simple enough. They just perform one atomic task that they easily to get things done. So,
sorry, just to clarify, do we have a pile of single static agents, or do we have a bunch of agents that are spun up by some orchestrator or manager and created as needed? Is it a dynamic system?
So that's very interesting. That's one of the misconceptions we're talking about. A lot of people, when they talk about multi-agents on agentic system, they're actually talking about, okay, now agent 1 do this. After agent 1 is done, agent 2 will take over and do that, and so on and so forth. So I don't think that that's an agent system. What we typically call that is an agentic workflow, where you have predetermined task for each agent, and they perform these tasks in specific order. What you just described is basically a pool of agents that flow around. They don't know order. They know what they can do, right? And some other agent will say, okay, now given this task, we're gonna call agent 3 first, and then agent 1. It's some arbitrary order tailored specific for this task. So remember, at the beginning of this episode, we talk about the key to define something as an agent is autonomy. Now, in the agentic workflow, the autonomy is limited in the specific task, how the agent is performing that task. And that's also controlled by the prompts, right? The prompts already specify how you should do that. So it has very limited autonomy. Whereas in the full agentic system, they decide the sequence. They decide, what task happen first, and they decide, do they need to start over as a group?
Okay.
So they have full autonomy that way.
Okay. Who has the autonomy? Each individual agent or the society of agents?
I think as long as the society has autonomy, we can call it an agentic system. But I think the dream or the holy grail is every agent should have full autonomy of doing something, or actually not doing something.
How do they coordinate?
There are certain ways to do this. One way is you have some kind of orchestrator, a facilitator that will manage this team of agents. There are other ways. For example, you basically have some kind of assembly line in a manufacturing factory. The assembly line always going, and the agents are basically workers stand by the assembly line that decide to pick up a task from the assembly line and perform that. And after they're done, they put it back. That's a different way to do that. And in a way, there's no manager There's no manager in the workshop to look over these workers by the assembly line. They have full autonomy to decide, I want to do this. And now I'm done, I'm putting it back. Where with the orchestrator model, that function as a manager, the manager will say, okay, Phil, now you do this. And Jay, you do next after Phil's done. I would say, the assembly line model clearly have more or higher autonomy compared to, the manager-based model.
Now, I know we're going to talk more specifically about some agentic systems that you've built in later episodes, but if you could give us a little teaser of when you're thinking about building something like this, you have to decide if it's going to be an orchestrator model or a workshop model, right? The main guy, Dr. J here, right? What are some thoughts, what are some criteria that come into your mind about what would be the better way to do it? Or is it trial and error? Or how do you think about the bigger pictures of putting an agentic system together?
I think, that's a great question. I think, trial and error is, never fails. Right?
Always fails.
You try the simple way, it doesn't work, you go to the next. So we can actually see different layers here, right? For example, developing or deploying agentic workflow with fixed sequences, fixed order, that might be easier than a manager, worker model, than full autonomy agents through via assembly line. So actually, when I just got into designing and developing agents, I picked like everybody else, I picked the agentic workflow where I already know what are the steps, right? Because I work as a consultant, I know most of these things working these fixed steps. And maybe you need to iterate here and there. You need to have conditionals here and there, but these are the main steps. So you can build the agents that way. And then, maybe you discover that's not enough. You actually want the agents to have more control. Or actually, you're surprised the agents actually can do more than you think. Then you go to the manager, worker model and say, here's a manager, which is basically a human agent, a function as you, and say, do this and do that, right? Basically, the manager will prompt the agents to do things. And then, and you find out, okay, that's good, but you might want finer control, and these are, reasoning heavy tasks that require, different things. So maybe you will go to the full assembly line model where you want agents to take control of themselves.
Do you, when you think about it at first, obviously I know you're always thinking about scale.
Yeah.
Right. Always.
Yeah.
But is that starting from the very first moment, or the first moments you're sort of trying to get something to work, prototype, and then later you add on questions about scale?
I think, you should always think about scale, like you said, but mostly the first prototype, the first version of something you build, like we said before, you're shooting for a quick win.
Okay.
You're shooting for a quick win here. Once you have that quick win, because when in your first version, you're not shooting for the bulletproof results. A lot of times you're looking for that, proof of concept. Does that fly? I don't really know. Now I want to see. And a lot of times you're doing building, but you're also doing it in a diagnostic way that, maybe my idea was wrong in this step. So I want to build that thing and see what's going on here. So scale is not the most important thing, but scale is something you should always think about, because if you don't build something to scale, you shouldn't build that. That's always my philosophy.
That makes sense. And I like that. That sounds like really good advice for using AI in general, is look for quick wins, which maybe you could compare that to the fail fast mentality of venture capital and whatever entrepreneurship, because I agree with you. It's really important to see that there's some proof of concept, some demo, that there's some example that it's worth continuing, right? As opposed to, okay, that doesn't work and let's do something else.
Well, I don't think they are contradicting. I think they're the same thing. You're shooting for that quick win. If you cannot get a quick win, you fail fast.
Okay.
Right? So that's the thing. If you cannot even get that simple quick win, then maybe it's not worth your while.
Interesting. So it's like human psychology.
Yes.
That makes sense. Okay, so let's talk about scale. How do you manage these kinds of systems at scale?
Scaling is always a very tricky part in when designing these things, because at first, like we said, you shoot for that quick win. You have a lot of makeshift duct tape kind of thing to connect things together, and these things are brittle. They're rigid. They don't scale. So scaling actually in system design a lot of times meaning you're ripping off these duct tapes and well things fall apart, and you can imagine how frustrating that is. But then that's the part, next time in the design, you need to look at that part and say, instead of duct tape, maybe I should use a U-shaped connector somewhere to make it happen. So to scale, we talk about, with agents, you have to give it tools to perform certain things. And if you just give it specific tools for certain specific things, the consistency might be an issue. How the agent decide to use that tool, right? Because it doesn't matter how great your prompt is or your tool is defined, there is some kind of vagueness in that design, right? So every time I use that tool, maybe it's inconsistent. It's similar to, remember we're talking about AI as brilliant, interns. You can give it different tools as sticky notes. Do this, do that, do this, do that. But sometimes you'll find out, you're always asking this intern to do this and then do that. And these happen together. So sometimes we build this tool together called a model context protocol. It's basically just a collection of tools and with detailed instructions how to use this tool. What are you supposed to use that tool? And basically an additional note compared to the sticky notes is how these two work together, right? So that's something. So it's more like a handbook of employee, right? Like we have faculty handbook. You should do this when you're teaching. You should do that when you're grading, something like that. So that's, I think, is a great way to manage consistency of certain tasks and things like that. But keep in mind, that's, these tools, their definitions, their interactions, they will also take up your precious context window. Whenever you have, one MCP that will take up part of your eating to your context window, and you have another one waiting to another piece of a context window. So, when I'm using, for example, coding tools, coding agents, and sometimes I want to give it, tools. For example, it can read my code files, or it can actually run my code, or doing this test, or write documentation for me. Nobody likes documentation. No programmer likes documentation. So, I was doing a quick check after loading all these MCVs. I only have 20% of a context window to do the actual work, right? So that is a problem to look at.
Could you do RAG on the MCP, or is that silly?
Well, that might be a good idea, but so far nobody has done that. I think what the MCP is basically a collection of tools, and you let the agent to decide which specific tool to call from that tool set. It's already doing some kind of RAG in there. But but what you want is another layer above that is here are all the MCPs. First decide which one to use for this specific task, right? So, I hope that exists. But what I do right now is I only load the necessary MCP. And most of the time I limit that to two. One will manage the agent's memory. The other one will do the task I hate most, which is documentation. And that's the bare minimum. So it doesn't eat into my precious context window. And I think, with MCP, there's also something we want to look into credibility, because we mentioned this a couple of times. We haven't officially talked about this. Is hallucination, right? We don't fully trust what AI gives us. So with tool calling, for example, like we said, you want the current weather at Fairfield, you may want to call a tool and call the weather service to get the exact data. So in a way, tool calling and MCP will help with credibility. But there are other ways to help with credibility. We're talking about, sometimes there's this trade-off, right? You cannot use the MCP. For example, to better use just a single tool. For example, you already know you only need the weather data. So you don't need this weather center service of 20 different tools. You just need that get weather data tool. And to better use that tool, there are frameworks you can use. For example, one framework I use a lot is called plan, review, execute. So first you plan how to use that tool, then you review the plan, then you execute the tool, but according to the plan. Mm-hmm. The beauty of that is you can also do plan execution review. That's another way of doing this. Right? And it has a good acronym PER, P-E-R, right? But why do we do pre-plan review execute instead of PER is execute is more expensive. Mm-hmm. Plan is not as expensive. Execute is very expensive, meaning not expensive in terms of money, not only, but also expensive in terms of compute, right? Compute is king right now. So if you just review the plan, you find out the non-logical, non-reasonable part in your plan, that's much easier to fix than, after you fix that after execution. And the next thing I think is very important in terms of credibility is always consider, always think about scaling. Part of scaling is you'll have to involve human into the loop. For example, we're still best at doing certain things, a lot of things actually, right? And you should, ask for example, your agents or your AI to present the results to you to review, right? And I think more and more, and here's my big AI bet here. I know people are excited about that. Is I think in next year in 2026 we'll see not only us prompting AI, but more AI prompting us.
Sounds scary.
Well, it could be scary, but it could also be efficient.
Did AI tell you to say that?
Yeah, the little button here.
This has been amazing, Jay. A complete paradigm shift, both from last episode and for now. In a sense, let me ask you a general question. When we were talking about prompt engineering, it's intern, right? We're telling an intern what to do. Here, we're sort of, is it fair to say, when we start talking about agents, we're thinking about how to design institutions.
Companies, yes.
So it's a higher order. It's a higher order of planning and thinking and designing.
Yes.
You're not designing like a single building. You're designing like neighborhoods.
Yeah. That's amazing. Why we said, scaling should be always on your mind.
Makes perfect sense. Now, I imagine most of the audience is thinking this is fantastic. I need to do this right away. My life is meaningless without it. But they're worried about where to start. What is like a tangible first step they can take?
So again, I think you should start thinking about your day-to-day workflows and processes and how you get something done, and start, like we said, start reviewing it. Reviewing for two things at the first step is one, are they valid? Are they reasonable, right? And B, looking for that specific entry point for automation, right? What's taking you so long to do certain things? So we will actually provide a resource, maybe a one-page planner to help you with that. Basically a check card, a health card of your process, how valid your process is, and what are the symptoms you should look for when you think about automation. So this would be basically a roadmap, for you to look into. We consider adopting AI to automate your business processes. And again, you can download that as our website or, in a comment.
Wait, that's free too?
Yes.
All this stuff is free?
Yeah.
Jay, you're too nice. Yeah. So after they download this amazing, brilliant, free blueprint, courtesy of Dr. J. Tao, they get a teaser of what like a real world application might look like. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, you may be just using what we said an agentic workflow, or you ambitiously design a complex agentic system, like we said. The question is always, are you just automating a simple task? Or remember what we said at the beginning, what you really want is to elevate the outcome of the task. It doesn't matter how or what you're automating. It matters what kind of difference are you making. Are you boosting employee efficiency? Are you bringing more revenue? You're doing something, right? So that's from my consulting role is nobody cares about your tech demo. All they care about is these kind of strategy, business-related questions is, are you doing something better? Are you doing something faster? Are you making more money? Something like that. So the resource we provide the planner is just a blueprint. You can see that, you can read that, but I think the more valuable thing, which we're gonna touch upon next episode, is I'm gonna show you how to actually build an agentic system. From the initial thought of doing that to we're about to launch that soon. So the whole journey, what's it look like? And more importantly, the lessons I learned along the journey. And I guess more valuable to you as the audience is all the mistakes I made. I'm not someone who's afraid to talk about my mistakes. So I made those mistakes. I'm sharing that with you so you guys don't have to make those mistakes. So that's our next episode. Again, feel free to subscribe and comment and let us know.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Jay. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.